Well met. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nathanius, and I'd like to show you a build I call the 3 Command Center Cyclone Opener. This is a Terran versus Protoss opening that will allow you to safely hold off most mid-game harass while comfortably getting up to double engineering bays and a healthy economy to take to the mid-late game versus Protoss. Without further ado, I've taken this from a replay of my own gameplay on ladder versus White Raw. You may have heard of him before, so let's get this started. Naturally, at the beginning of the game, you want to get your worker up, and if you're new to Legacy of the Void, of course you want to constantly build workers as much as you possibly can. And then one of the ways that we do this is we also rally our SCV to the wall. That first SCV that comes out, we want to use to start our depot, get our wall going early on in the game. As we can see, it's at 14 supply that we start that first depot. You never want to start it later because naturally as Terran, our depots take longer to build than pylons and overlords, so we naturally get supply blocked for a brief moment. That means you want to start that depot as fast as possible. Now, of course, you want to keep building SCVs, and the SCV that builds the supply depot should also begin the barracks shortly after. You'll see this is at about 41 seconds into the game, at 16 supply because you have another worker starting as soon as your depot completes. The next step is to open up with a Reaper, and this requires us after starting that gas, after starting that barracks, to immediately start that gas. And then I like to send an SCV out to scout. So to go recover, just real quick, at 41 seconds or at 16 supply, you start your barracks after your depot's done. You then immediately take your gas, continue building SCVs, and send a worker across the map. What you're looking for with this SCV is, has my opponent expanded? By the way, make sure to put 2 extra SCVs on gas when it finishes. Has my opponent expanded? Is there a gateway in his main base? If you show up and your opponent has absolutely nothing in their main base except maybe an assimilator or a pylon, that should tell you right away they've built their tech somewhere else and you need to be on the lookout for a cheese. Now, when your barracks is complete, you want to take the SCV that built it and move it over to wherever your natural expansion may be. You also want to start your orbital command. You can do this by pressing B when your command center is selected if you're using the standard hotkey layout. Now, with your barracks, you want to start a Reaper. This Reaper starts roughly a minute and a half into the game. This Reaper is going to be rallied across the map to follow up your original SCV scout. As soon as that Reaper is on the way, take your SCV that built the barracks, go to your natural, and start a command center. This is BC on the standard hotkey layout. Once your command center is on the way, and your SCV has confirmed that your opponent has either expanded and built their tech in their main base, that you are not being cheesed, you want to start your second supply depot inside of your main base to help finish off your wall. If your opponent was proxying tech versus you, this would at least give you some time as they try to destroy your wall to prepare for a follow-up defense. Now, after your Reaper is complete, you want to start a Marine so that you can have just a little bit of extra defense. If your opponent late probe scouts and your Reaper doesn't find that probe, you want to have a Marine to make sure that they can't get up your wall and sit there waiting to see what you're going to do. You also want to spend your next 100 gas as soon as you can afford it on a factory. That's VF on a standard hotkey layout. The factory is going to be used to open up with a very fast tech lab into a very fast Cyclone. This is the linchpin of the build order. This factory must be built as soon as you can afford it after that Reaper starts. Now, the point of this build is to be a little bit greedier because we assume that you've scouted your opponent has a Nexus in their natural and that you've scouted your opponent hasn't built any fast tech on your side of the map. In this game, I saw nothing threatening because this second assimilator was taken so late. Because of this, I'm going to open up with a very fast third command center. When your factory is on the way, you want to press C if you're using standard hotkey layout on your barracks to build a reactor. This will allow you to produce 2 Marines at a time so that you can quickly build up your defenses while you wait for your Cyclone. Afterwards, you want to start your tech lab on your factory. Generally, you want your factory to be finishing at around 3 minutes in the game timer. This way, you can time your build against mine to make sure that you have your Cyclone out as fast as possible. It is the most important part of this opening because it is what can defend against most any attack a Protoss player would bring early on. Now, once your tech lab is on the way, If you're feeling comfortable, start a third command center. I like to build it at the edge of my base so that I have more vision of everything inside of my main. Just in case a cheeky probe or warp prism shows up, you want to have as much vision of your own base as possible. I'll follow that up by starting my second gas in my main base. This allows me to more easily afford a second Cyclone if I think I need one, or other follow-up tech. It's important as well to constantly keep production running. You're building 2 Marines at a time, not because the Cyclone can't do the job, but because you want to have a little bit of extra support. Those Marines are going to be very useful for spreading out around your base to make sure the areas your Cyclone isn't covering are covered. That being said, the tech lab finishes up. I start my second gas in my main base at around 3.5 minutes, and at around 3.5 minutes, we start the Cyclone. The Cyclone is a mechanical, anti-air, anti-ground, lock-on turret. I call it the Terran's Roomba. It's a very expensive unit, but what it can do is lock on to pretty much anything, and it can defeat most protoss units early in a 1 versus 1. Our Marines are going to have a little bit of trouble versus adepts and stalkers in the open field, but a Cyclone can defeat any protoss gateway unit 1v1 with no trouble whatsoever. In fact, if you're having trouble facing adept openings, not only can the Cyclone lock on to warp prisms and kill them quickly, but they can also defeat adepts in a 1 versus 1 or 1 versus 2 scenario. We can see here that the Cyclone easily makes short work of this stalker because its lock-on is automatic and requires little to no micro to obtain its first target. As you play versus better opponents, you'll want to make sure to manually target the lock-on ability so that you can kill the most important forces that they have. Now that our Cyclone is out on the map, we want to make sure that our second base gets saturated. We have 16 workers in our main, and we have 3 workers on each gas. We change our rally to the natural, and we can drop our mules pretty much wherever we want. Since these are fresher patches, we want those mules to work on these because, well, they're going to last longer. Now, the follow-up to this play, as we turn our third command center into an orbital, is to move our factory, start a reactor on it, and build a starport. We want a reactor at starport because we're going to be playing with a lot of Marines and Marauders, using Stimpak to give our army an extra boost in damage and attack speed. So, the ideal way to do this, of course, is going to require healing. Double medevac production is one of the most important things in the Terran midgame because it allows us to stim our units without worrying about, well, killing our own units. We float the barracks over, we started 2 barracks, and we just go right away into that Stimpak upgrade. So what this is going to allow us to do is to set up for a very healthy position. Of course, if you're curious when we started these barracks again, it's about as soon as you can afford them. That's really the best way for me to put it. We swap the starport onto the factory, and we start 2 engineering bays in our natural after taking 2 gas geysers. The timing of these gas geysers is not important. The most important thing to do is to go for a 3-rack setup while you're on 2 bases with this reactored starport. As you move out to take your 3rd base, start a 4th and 5th barracks, look for an opportunity to start an armory, and afterwards, upgrade. I'll make more mid-game and late-game tutorials for Protoss at other times, but the idea here was just to ask if you guys like this format for showing an opening, and this is how I like to open versus Protoss every game. If you have comments, suggestions, feedbacks, if you think this is too short or too much, please let me know. This is the first build order tutorial I put up for Legacy of the Void, so this is how I open versus Protoss. I'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions in the comments below. Thank you, and have a great night.